Hello and welcome to another episode of Wiggy Reviews! Today we're gonna jump into the Master of Horror yet again with Finders Keepers by Stephen King. So Finders Keepers continues the story of Bill Hodges, our protagonist from the first Bill Hodges book, Mr. Mercedes. And if you remember what happened in Mr. Mercedes, it was about a crazy man who ran over people and starts taunting Bill Hodges, and then he has to save it. He has to figure out what he's planning to do before lives are lost. Yes, basically that's it. But we're not reviewing that because I already reviewed that, and you should check that review out. Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. Anyways, but this is Finders Keepers. Finders Keepers is the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, and this one takes place kind of in two time periods, before and after Mr. Mercedes occurs. So let's hop right into it. The basic overall story begins in the 1970s with Morris Bellamy, our antagonist. Ooh. He is robbing John Rothstein. Now, I guess I have to do a little bit of backstory on John Rothstein just so you understand. John Rothstein in this book is a great American author who wrote great American literature, and he was considered a top author, a top visionary of writing, and his main series was the Jimmy Gold trilogy. A story about kind of a vagabond who goes across America not giving into the roles that are assigned to him, and by the end of the trilogy, he goes from being someone who is against the grain, against the American corporations and all that, and he settles down, he gets married, has a family, and then he becomes an ad salesman. He comes up with ads for the corporations that he fought against in the first books. And yeah, that's John Rothstein. Remember that. So the story opens up with Morris Bellamy robbing at gunpoint John Rothstein. And we learn through this exchange that Morris blames Rothstein for selling out, saying, "You had such a great character, you let him become the exact opposite of what he is. You betrayed your readers, you betrayed yourself, and you betrayed Jimmy Gold, the character." And you find out through the exchange between Morris and John Rothstein that Morris is very obsessed with the Jimmy Gold series. Kind of reminiscent of another lovely lady who is also obsessed with a book series by an author. Misery, anyone? So we're kind of going back to Stephen King's roots a little bit. And so Rothstein mocks Morris, says, "You're just trying to live through it. You're just upset because you can't distinguish reality from fiction," and blah, 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 blah. And of course, that doesn't sit well with our friend Morris, and he kills Rothstein. And he steals, I think it was 20 plus journals of unpublished material by John Rothstein and $20,000 in cash. And runs away. And he makes it home. He hides his stash, and you also learn that he got the idea from a colleague of his, Andrew Halliday. He comes into play later, so remember that name too. And once Andrew Halliday realizes what Morris has done, he is like, "Oh my gosh, what do you did it? I thought we were kidding. I can't sell this. We can't sell this stuff. Like, you're insane. Don't ever come talk to me again, or else I'll call the police." And Morris, pissed off, angry that his friend suddenly does a 180, gets depressed and furious, and he goes out drinking, and he ends up getting blackout drunk, and when he wakes up, he's in jail. And he's like, holy crap, they know I did it. They caught me. They know I stole and I murdered Rothstein, and I'm gonna get the death penalty, But he finds out that he's actually in jail because while he was blackout drunk, he actually raped a woman. So, he's relieved, but also facing life in prison now. But he's just happy that he didn't get caught for his other crimes, even though he has to go away for life. So yeah, that's Morris's story. So he goes to prison, sentenced for life, and continuously tries to get parole for years and years and years and years. So now we jump forward in time from the 1970s all the way to early 2000s, and we meet the Saubers family, which includes Pete, his little sister Tina, and their mother and father. And they're struggling because both of their parents are unemployed, and struggling to pay for their children, pay for their home, and all food and all that. So Pete's father decides to go to a job fair early in the morning to try to get a job because they're promising thousands of jobs for people. And he goes, and unfortunately, it just happens to be the job fair where, from Mr. Mercedes, our friend Brady Hartsfield drives a Mercedes into a crowd of people, and Pete's father is horribly injured. He loses the ability to walk. He's not paralyzed forever, but he does lose use of his legs, and it will take years and years and years and thousands of dollars for him to learn to walk again. And so on top of those payments and the payments for the house, the family eventually has to move out of their home to a lower income house, and ironically move into the same house that Morris Bellamy used to live in. Ironic! And the family starts getting more torn apart. The mother and father are arguing all the time. There's threats of divorce going around, and Pete and Tina have to find ways to survive during this difficult time. And during one day, when Pete just needs to get out of the house, he walks around and he just happens to find a case that was buried in the ground. And when he opens it up, he finds over 20 notebooks and $20,000 in cash. What are the odds? And then he has to ultimately decide what he's going to do about it. Is he going to report it to the police? Is he going to use the money himself? Is he going to try to sell the notebooks to someone? And while he's trying to think and decide what he's going to do, he eventually comes to a major decision saying, my family needs the help. I'm going to anonymously send the money over over periods of time so that we can survive this and my parents won't split up. So he does that. He begins mailing anonymous letters to the house with between $500 and $1,000 in cash. Once a month, these letters come, and he keeps the notebooks for himself. He discovers that it's the property of John Rothstein, and he actually goes and he reads John Rothstein's work, and he realizes what he has. He has 2 unpublished books of the Jimmy Gold series in there, and he has to decide, what am I going to do with this? But until then, he keeps it secret, keeps it for himself, reading it and rereading it, and becoming ultimately very interested in the literary world and wanting to do something with that with his life. Now we fast forward a few more years. Morris Bellamy is in his 60s. He's finally gotten parole because the woman who he raped finally has forgiven him. Basically, she was dying and she forgives him. And Morris Bellamy gets parole and he gets to get out, and he's excited. He's like, I can finally read what's in those notebooks. I don't even care about the $20,000. That's nice to have, but I just want to read what's in those notebooks. Because what if there's Jimmy Gold books in there and Rothstein actually, salvaged him? So he discovers that the notebooks and the cash are gone. Basically, it's a race against time for Pete to find a way to save his family from Morris, who finally does discover that Pete was the one who took it and is threatening his family. Now, Bill Hodges comes into play. And Tina, Pete's sister is the one who actually calls Hodges and says, my brother's acting weird, we need help, something's going on. And Hodges has to discover what's happening before Morris gets to Pete, before Morris can do any damage to Pete and his family. So it's a race against time again. And that's as simple as I can make it, I guess, without, like, excluding a lot of information that's kind of important. So let's just get right into the characters. So Pete Saubers is the main protagonist for most of the book. He begins the story young, I think in middle school, and then we meet him later on when he's graduating high school. And he is a very caring boy. He really tries to he tries to protect his sister from the arguments that his parents constantly have, and tries to protect her from the cruelties of the world, even though they are trapped kind of in the middle of it. His intention with the money was pure of heart. He just wanted to help his family. The notebooks actually kind of open his eyes to a new world of, not having to follow rules, but also, standing up for yourself and blah, 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 that stuff. Morris Bellamy is a great character, great antagonist. He is so obsessed with the Rothstein notebooks that he's willing to kill over it. And his obsession kind of is the only thing that kept him going in his life sentence at prison. He's like, I can keep going because I know eventually I'll be able to get out of here, and I can read the notebooks, and everything will be good. I'm not going to let anybody else see them. They're just going to be mine, and I'm going to just read them over and over, and they'll be my secret, my thing. And even in his old age, like, he spends his, almost his whole life in prison because he gets the life sentence and doesn't get out till he's 60, and he was about 20 when he went in. And it hardened him. It hardened him, and he had to learn a lot of survival things, but he still kept his, rage of Rothstein, and his rage at his friend Andrew Halliday, reneging on their discussions or their promises. And so the danger increases from there once you realize that he's willing to do anything to get those notebooks. Anything. John Rothstein, already kind of went over him. Let's see. Bill Hodges is back, and it's not just him. Holly and Jerome come back as well, so it's the trio from Mr. Mercedes. I guess that's a spoiler if you haven't read Mr. Mercedes. Holly, if you don't know who Holly is, read it. I know who you are. So those three are back to solve the crime, and again, Holly proves to be an absolute necessity in the group with her computer skills, her knowledge of current events, and everything going on in the world. Hodges is in a lot better shape. He is now kind of a private investigator. He also does a couple of bounty hunting as well, a little bit. More repo, I guess. He repos a lot of things, but if they happen to also have a bounty on their head, he'll nudge them in the proper direction towards the police. Jerome is off at college. He comes back for the summer and helps out. He's matured a lot more than he was in the previous book. What else can I talk about? I mean, there's a lot of characters in the book. There's a lot of stories going on. So let's just go right into overalledness. That's a word. Shut up. I really enjoyed how this book is written, because we don't even get to Hodges until the last third, which normally would probably bug me, because he's the name of the trilogy, but it's because there was so much information going on with Morris and Pete that it just kind of felt like you needed all that information in order to understand what was happening. And if Hodges stuff was interjected within, it would have broken up the story, and it just would have been confusing. So it was nice to just kind of have like sections of Morris, sections of Pete, sections of Morris, sections of Pete, and then we get to Hodges finally coming in. And the story was actually really, really, like, when I first read what the story was about, I was a little concerned that, oh my god, is this going to be too much like Misery? Is it going to be a little, like, lazy, but it wasn't. It was great. The story had its own life, had its own darkness as well, life and darkness. Like Morris's obsession is a completely different obsession than Annie's in Misery. So it was great to see a different aspect of it and coming from a different point of view, I guess. And then watching someone get in the way of that obsession, not knowingly get in the way of it, was frightening and very nail-biting, ensuing. And then Pete, like he said, everything he did was purely for his family. Like he had nothing was selfish on his part, except for how long he held on to those notebooks, because he was afraid that if he tried to turn them into the police, would he be arrested for stealing, even though he just happened to find them, or would they ask, well, what happened to the money, and all the things that you typically go through when you find something, and then you realize a little too late that you should have just turned it in right away. And it was all overall very good, and it was its own unique thing, especially if you are familiar with Misery. Yeah. So I'm gonna get right into my ranking, and this will probably make a lot of people angry, but I don't care. This is my review, and I will admit I am biased against Stephen King. Yeah, I said it. I like him. I like his writing. Which is why I'm giving Finders Keepers a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Because it wasn't what I expected. It went above and beyond what I thought it was going to be. And I did like, even though it's part of the Bill Hodges trilogy, Bill didn't play a big role until he needed to. He wasn't forced to be in the story until, again, he was absolutely necessary to be in the story. So, Finders Keepers, 10 out of 10. If you read this before Mr. Mercedes, what's wrong with you? Yeah. So there we go. Anyways. So thank you for joining me on Wiggy Reviews. Next week, I'm going to be reading another author's second book. I'm going to be reviewing Armada by Peter Clines. And if you don't know who that guy is, check out my Ready Player One review. So I will see you next time. Bye!